I think if we compare ourselves to what is happening in the US, what is happening in China, what's happening to Israel, we will never grow. We have to find our own way to success. No copy and paste will work here. Problem statements are no longer hidden in corners. Everybody knows what global problems are and what can be solved for. In $500,000, they went from an idea to a realized rocket engine. Companies have raised hundreds of millions of dollars abroad and not yet created anything.
True. Hi, I'm Arvind Radhakrishnan. Welcome to Upstart by WeWork Labs, a WeWorkIndia initiative. With Upstart, we want to focus on everything you want to know about the startup ecosystem from the people you want to hear it from, like my guest today, an IITian, a tech leader, an entrepreneur, a founder, investor, mentor. These are just a few of the labels that apply to Manish Singhal. From his early career back in Motorola Labs in the 90s, all the way to creating some of our foremost startup ecosystem players like Let's Venture and more recently Pi Ventures, Manish has seen our ecosystem grow and more importantly, seen the evolution of our deep tech space. His portfolio now includes some of our household deep tech names like Niramai, Agnikul, Vaisa, and several others. Manish, thank you for taking the time. Super excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Arvind. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you are here because you've actually made my job a lot easier. What we're trying to do with Upstart is actually break down the ecosystem into its pillars and actually explore each of these pillars that affect the ecosystem from a variety of stakeholders. But with you, I get 6 stakeholders in one person. So you've made my job a lot easier. So I'm going to start with something pretty broad, right? And that's because of the nature of deep tech. So if you look at deep tech, it covers sectors as far as green hydrogen, battery tech, life sciences and genomics, robotics, manufacturing 4.0. It's so broad. So I think a good place to start would be, how would you define deep tech? What is the common thread that makes something deep tech?
Sure. Well, I think we are also trying to define it over a period of time, to be honest. But there are some simple principles that we follow to sort of figure this out. I think the fundamental notion is if you are solving any problem, but you're solving it on a base of a technical innovation, which is non-trivial,
Okay.
then it potentially is deep tech.
Yeah.
Now, what is trivial, what is non-trivial is where the debate sort of begins, right? In my mind, if you, let's say, define a problem and put 4-5 smart people, give them that target, and if they can crack it within a finite period, let's say 6 months, 9 months, or a year, then it's probably does not fit in the non-trivial category.
Right.
Okay. And therefore, then, and if they can't, then it probably fits. Give you some examples. If you take some of our companies like Agnikul, the only company in the world which has cracked 3D printed rocket engines,
Correct.
which can fly. They've actually done a flight as well now, right?
Right.
And so many companies across the world have actually adapted it with the best of their rocket scientists.
Right.
But this is the only company which has actually created one and flew,
Right.
So this definitely falls in the non-trivial innovation space,
Sure.
and therefore deep tech. Whereas, let's take another example. Let us say somebody is trying to automate how recommendations are made to you while you are, let's say, watching Netflix on what movies you can watch, what shows you can watch.
Sure.
That recommendation system was difficult to build few years back, but today with all the advances in AI, it may not be that difficult to build. I think there are several companies which can build it, or several people who can build it. Right. And therefore it will not fall in the deep tech. Anything which is a non-trivial innovation, which can change the outcome of the problem you are solving, is deep tech.
Right. It's almost like it centers around defensibility. And I think even the entry barrier for deep tech with needing such highly skilled teams and the gestation period and the R&D that goes behind it, would that be a way to see it as well?
Yeah.
Or would it be the
So, yes, defensibility is definitely one.
Sure.
But most of the time, defensibility is defined in terms of time frame.
Sure.
So let's say I have discovered this today,
Right.
a smart set of team may figure it out 6 months later. So then, but if you can't crack it, let's say for 2 years, then it is more deep tech versus
Right.
the other, right?
Right.
And investment in R&D, investment in innovation driven is important. And sometimes you have an insight. Some founders we have met that it's not so much about putting the research back there, but they have an insight on how to crack that problem.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that insight becomes their moat, which finally has to realize into something.
Right.
But that could be another way of looking at it.
Okay, that makes sense. There's actually, I want to sort of zoom out a little bit. If you look at 5 to 6 years ago, or even a decade ago, almost when you started Pi Ventures, deep tech wasn't, like India didn't have such an urgent deep tech mandate, right? I mean, it was obviously there were things being worked on, but it was much smaller and it seemed to be much less urgent, if I can use that word, back then, right? Now, obviously, so much has changed and very quickly. How would you explain that? It shouldn't just be about ChatGPT. That it seems like it's broader than that. And there's other forces at play. What would you say has made it urgent?
I think some of these changes, it's like bamboo shoots, right? You can't see them, they're growing inside.
Right.
So some of those things appear after some time. So let me just break that down, right? So for example, if you look at our tech ecosystem, like you roll back maybe 40 years, India was known for literally body shopping,
Sure.
right? We were smart engineers. They go and solve problems in their office.
Right.
Then came the whole transformation maybe 20 years back where, okay, the teams are getting set up here and work is being defined by somebody else and we are doing it. Then came the transition to, okay, now we have learned enough and we can define our own problems to solve. That was the product revolution.
Sure.
And the next revolution is, it's not just about product. It is about creating IPs,
Sure.
which are fundamentally game changing.
Right.
So this transition in technology, expertise and confidence is growing over years.
Right.
What has happened in the last, so we've been early sort of proponents of deep tech, right? Last few years. In the last, I would say 3-4 years, role models have started appearing.
Okay.
And I want to, for a moment, distinguish between software deep tech, if you will, and
Sure.
physical deep tech. Software deep techs are less capital intensive, maybe slightly easier to build,
Sure.
and slightly easier to sell.
Sure.
So that came first. Typically in AI, typically in cyber security, etc. But in AI, things are changing so fast. Things are no longer deep tech, which used to be deep tech, right? That scale has changed. In the physical side is where things have changed dramatically in the last few years. What has led to those beliefs is companies like Agnicool, Pixel, Idea Forge. There are a lot of examples, Tonbo Imaging. There are a lot of companies which have actually cracked a ceiling of turning a technology into a business,
Sure.
right? And that has given a confidence to a whole lot of entrepreneurs to think big
Right.
and really take those big risks.
Sure.
Along came with certain programs of government which actually help them take that seed money easy.
Right.
Or get some grants from the army to do certain things, because defense and deep tech always go hand in hand in any country.
True.
Typically, defense drives the deep tech demand in a lot of places, right? Defense needs. So if there is a good collaboration of money and need, the
Sure.
deep tech system will grow. And we are seeing that in the last few years in India, right?
Interesting.
So
Okay.
those are some of the things. The other thing probably would be that just the maturity of how India is looked in the global market.
Sure.
Today, maybe 5-6 years back, I was still seeing the stigma of an Indian entrepreneur selling to global customer and like you're from India and therefore blah, blah, blah. Today, that is not there. Today, our founders are able to sell globally
Sure.
on the merit of what they have built rather than on the label of where you are from.
Right.
And those things are changing very fast. So we've said this before and we may, I don't know what will happen, but today, if you talk about deep tech in the world, you think of Israel, you think of US, you think of China.
Right.
We don't think of India.
Right.
things will be different in 5 years, just 5 years. When you say deep tech, India will be on the global map of the deep tech revolution.
Interesting. That actually that made me think of something. It's been said that globally there's sort of an arms race, right, to get, especially in AI, but across deep tech. It seems like it has been discussed that there's almost like India has a second sort of race against time because it has this window of opportunity within which it has a young population that's being upskilled for a deep tech world, etc. What do you feel about that? Does that give us an edge as we compete with global players?
I think India has an edge.
Okay.
And I don't think it's a squeezing time window.
Okay.
Because our perspective change when we look at AI and deep tech, right? So then in AI race, India may not have a very strong play in terms of doing the fundamental model innovations.
Sure. Okay.
But deep tech, AI is just a very small fragment of the entire deep tech technology spectrum. Sure. What about quantum? What about material science is such a big thing. Right? We still haven't found an alternate to plastic which can be used everywhere, right? True. There are pockets where it is getting replaced. Such a basic material.
Right.
We've talked about artificial food, right? Food scarcity in the world.
Absolutely.
So material science will drive a lot of innovation, and that is not a squeezing window.
Sure.
There is a plenty of time and opportunity to do it. So I think I do believe that we have a great future in deep tech.
Sure.
Should we execute right, of course.
Right.
In the next years.
Yeah. Absolutely. That actually that leads to my next question. Again, looking at the global stage and just where a developed economy is versus us. So developed economy, by definition, sort of doesn't have to focus on, can afford to focus on frontier tech a lot more because they've got their food, healthcare, all the basics, the basic infra, middle income economy, sort of becoming a developed one.
Yeah.
So in this, when we still have to focus on these pillars, these base pillars, what is the role of deep tech? And you touched upon food, for example. How do you see that translating?
I think about it slightly differently.
Okay.
I think it's not related to what a country's needs are.
Okay.
Right? So if I am a developed economy, I have spare bandwidth and money to spend on some high fundamental research.
Sure.
Versus not is the notion here.
Right.
But I don't believe in it.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Okay. The reason things get pushed on the edges of the technology is not because the nation is trying to invest some government money into it. There may be the pockets of that. But that boundary gets pushed by entrepreneurs who with frugal means can change that.
Okay.
And it is that spirit that will take us forward.
Okay.
In some way, we will go forward in spite of our government rather than their help, right? Because policy making in India really needs to change if we have to hit this in 5 years.
Sure.
So what is happening now? Maybe I'll take an example of Agnikul, for example, right? Because that's very stark. In $500,000, they went from an idea to a realized rocket engine.
Right.
Companies have raised hundreds of millions of dollars abroad and not yet created anything.
True.
So that frugality is unbeatable.
Sure.
And it becomes more and more stark in the physical innovation side rather than on the software side.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
And that is happening because of the entrepreneurial nature of people who are taking that leap and doing it.
Sure.
It's not happening because Indian government wants to make a 3D printed rocket engine.
Sure.
Having said that, Indian government has done a lot for space sector and doing it through in-space program and the collaboration ISRO is doing with Agnikul. Right. So there are a lot of those things that is enabling this to move forward.
Right.
But the fundamental innovation is coming from the entrepreneurs.
Sure. But is there sort of a boundary to that? I know, as a VC, you must see, especially because it's a buzzword, you must see every deck that says AI, ML.
Yeah.
It's sort of a way to also attract investor interest in a way. Do you have a framework to sort of think of which innovations need AI and which don't? Or would you say that AI is pervasive, deep tech is pervasive enough to go through all innovations?
Yeah, we do. Short answer is we do have a framework.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think how to explain it.
Okay.
So, first of all, I think we need to de-link AI and deep tech.
Right.
So deep tech is a broader theme of technologies which are hard to crack.
Okay.
AI is one pillar in it.
Correct.
And
Right.
maybe just 20% of the entire, maybe lesser actually, of the whole deep tech scenario is just AI. The physical innovation world will be a lot bigger than AI world.
Right. Okay.
All right. So now to coming back to your question, I think the way to look at, so within the software stack of things, especially in enterprise, AI will become a horizontal layer more or less, right? So because a lot of things that where data is available, you can do something useful for AI.
Sure.
So the way to look at it is two parts. One is by using AI, I can make a 10x difference to the outcome. Daylight difference, let's talk about 10x becomes hard.
Sure.
I can really make a change on what the state of art is versus using AI versus not using AI.
Sure. Right.
So that's general AI application and it should do that. The second thing is for deep tech angle, whether it is hard to crack. Coming back to our original question, whether, what kind of time moat it has.
Right.
So those are the two criteria we use.
Okay, that makes sense. Actually, I'll get to the regulation piece in a bit because you've mentioned it, especially in space and defense. But even before that, I have this might put you on the spot a little bit, but I wanted a sense of how ready you think India is and the Indian ecosystem as a whole for deep tech investments. The reason I'm asking that is it's sort of it's one of those areas where a lot of risk is taken on by investors very early. You need to fund research that might eventually come to something. There are long gestation periods. There may be a high capex initially, right? So how do you see this working? For example, Ethereal Machines is one of those companies that took 7 years for the first machine, and now it's working.
Yeah.
So do you think the ecosystem as a whole is ready for that level of risk, that risk appetite? Or do you think it'll be reserved to a few who are, that risk loving?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. I think before I answer it, I want to talk about one philosophy, which is important. It is the macro versus micro philosophy.
Sure.
The macro and the micro philosophy is very important to sort of understand this dynamic. And the philosophy is basically sometimes from a macro level, things look different. So if I talk about what will the macro lens to your responses, there are 200 deep tech companies and hardly 5 of them or 10 of them have raised money.
Sure.
Right? So the macros, I can go back with the macro understanding that India is not ready for deep tech.
Sure. Okay.
What is the micro understanding? The micro is, 5 of them raised money and they are game changing, right? And next year maybe 10 will raise money. So when change happens, macro looks negative, micro looks positive. And then it comes to which category of believer you are. You think the macro will take over the micro or the micro will take over the macro over a period of time.
Interesting.
So the response to your question is, when we have to understand deep tech in Indian context, we have to be a believer in the micro trend.
Sure.
And then give it 5 years
Sure.
to see whether it can become a macro trend or not.
Right. I've never thought of it like that. What do you feel that inflection point will be? Because I'm definitely, I think, a believer in the micro, and that now we're at the beginning of this wave.
Yeah.
What is going to change to actually make that optimism kick up?
I think it's already changing.
Okay.
I think sometimes in these trends, it's very difficult to spot one point. It just happens little at a different curve.
Okay.
I'll give you some examples of why I believe it is changing.
Okay.
Maybe a bit of history. When we started the fund in 2016, we were the only fund in the country doing AI investments.
Right.
There were hardly any AI companies in India, by the way.
Sure.
So we got a lot of flack. Why are you doing AI? What will it do? Etc. etc. In fact, when we were raising money, one investor asked her, "Why are you raising money for Air India?"
Oh.
And that was the extent of exposure to AI. Sure. Today, every kid knows what AI is, right? It has changed so much. Now, and then we led the AI thesis in the country, and gradually we saw in 2-3 years, every fund was doing AI. And then 2019, I started talking about material science. And again, we were saying, oh man, you were doing AI investment, suddenly you're talking about material science, have you gone mad?
Yeah.
But today, if you see, and material science has a very great connection with physical innovation and deep tech.
Correct.
Correct?
Right.
So today, if you see, in 3-4 years, things have changed so much that AI is no longer deep tech, broadly speaking,
Sure.
but physical innovations are.
Right.
And if we were not ready then, we wouldn't be doing this.
Right.
And today, if you talk to different funds, irrespective of whether their thesis has ever thought about deep tech or not, everybody has a deep tech allocation.
Sure.
SaaS is going dead. You got to deploy the money. Where will you do it? Right?
True.
So people are finding new theses. So you can see that change.
Sure. That's very interesting. Okay, so then there's one other pillar that I think is key to actually boosting this whole ecosystem. That's the whole talent angle, right? Almost the spark of innovation across deep tech is that the research piece, right? And the successful commercialization of that research that develops in either software or physical innovations. Now, the way I was thinking about it was there's the long-term route, which is, we build 20, 50, 100 new IITs that eventually churn out research and we start building a real ecosystem. Obviously, this involves R&D investment as well. The other way, maybe in the short term, is actually to find a way to bring the talent that's trained outside back to India. My question is sort of, how do you see this? What's happening right now with both these trends, and how it's easier said than done to bring people back here. But what can we do to do that?
Yeah, sure. I think we have to be careful about quality versus quantity.
Sure.
Opening more IITs is a very bad idea
Okay.
because it just dilutes the quality of engineers coming out.
Okay.
I can easily say that 80-90% of the engineers India produces are not employable.
Sure.
And that's a problem. And most of the companies spend significant resources on training people. They have good talent,
Sure.
but they're not ready for the industry.
Right.
That has to change first,
Okay.
right, for the talent. Again, the macro versus micro philosophy here. Most of the disruptions happen in very small teams. 3 people will crack a technology.
Right.
It takes a bit more number of people to turn a technology into product. But then things are more defined.
Right.
So at the micro level, we have the talent. We have enough brains in the country for disruption to happen from the technology disruption to happen.
Sure.
The productization is where the scale comes in, and people are hiring and doing their own thing. People coming back, I have a mixed opinion on it. I think a lot of people are always looking at the grass which side it is greener.
Sure.
So when India was not green, they were going out. When they're getting fired, they're coming back.
Right.
And suddenly love the country is ignited from some reason,
Sure.
right? So those things have to be factored in, right? So we don't have to do anything to attract talent per se.
Sure.
If you do good work, people will come and work with you. And we have seen that in multiple companies in our portfolio. People who are doing cutting edge technology, people are coming from all over the world, they want to work with them. So then it becomes easier to build teams. But bottom line, we got to be very, very careful with this quality versus quantity thing.
Sure. So with R&D investments, I mean, ours are 0.7% of GDP, I think, as of a couple of years ago.
Sure.
Why is that? I've always wondered. Why do you feel like, as a country, there's been a lack of emphasis on R&D as opposed to 2.5 with China and 3.5 in the US?
I think this is again maybe a philosophical difference, but I belong to a different school here.
Okay.
I think if we compare ourselves to what is happening in the US, what is happening in China, what's happening to Israel,
Sure.
we will never grow. India is a very unique country. We have to find our own way to success.
Sure.
No copy and paste will work here.
Sure.
If you look at the ground scenario, Indian government actually has pretty good schemes for grants. Now, do we need more? Well, we could do with more, but can we make what is available slightly easier accessible to the founders?
Right.
in a way which actually gives credit to the merit
Sure.
of deserving. So I think we have to solve that piece first, rather than putting more money on the funnel up.
Makes sense. Thank you. Now we mentioned Israel and the US and China and everything. So I'm with you completely that we're going to find our own way, that our demographics and our drivers are very different from a lot of global ecosystems. But if we could just maybe capture where the global deep tech ecosystem is and where India fits within that. What I'm trying to get at is, where are our relative strengths? How do we use them better?
Yeah.
And where are maybe some areas that we need to improve?
Sure. I think very strong on talent.
Huh.
We are truly global in terms of our ability to do business.
Sure.
China has some problems. Israel has some other problems. More problems now than
Right.
before. Right?
True.
US is a different ballgame. Right? So in a way, our strong points are that we've got a whole bunch of talent here. We can do business anywhere in the world. We're respected for our technology work. So all those are very strong points. And therefore, we are seeing that. We are
Sure.
seeing that in companies doing. Problem statements are no longer hidden in corners. Everybody knows what global problems are and what can be solved for.
Right.
That is there. Where we can do better, I think we are screwing ourselves in our policies, big time. There is a lot of IP drain happening, just like brain drain was happening before.
Right.
The policies are such that a founder first choice of registering a company is actually abroad.
True.
And it limits a lot of domestic funds in their ability to support them.
Sure.
Creates all kinds of problems. IP goes abroad because the headquarters is abroad. For funds like us, it becomes hard to invest in those companies because SEBI has some restrictions on where you can invest, where you cannot invest.
Sure.
So, and they're all done for some good reasons at some point of time, but they're not changing fast enough with time.
Okay.
So I think one thing that can kill us as an ecosystem is our regulatory framework for supporting founders.
Right.
That is actually, in my opinion, going in the red.
Okay. That's interesting. That was precisely I think we've brought up regulation a couple of times. Where is the state of regulation right now? I know, for example, defense and space was deregulated, and that opened it up to the private sector. So then
Yes.
a lot of innovation happened there. How could you just expand on what you said about
Sure.
the regulatory framework and what needs to happen?
So there is a difference between regulatory framework and policies.
Right. Okay. Sure.
So the
Right.
space program is a policy making, and of course there are some regulations that they have released in that process,
Right.
like FDI investment and all, right? So these are good initiatives. They can really help the country like us.
Sure.
I think we have to start from very basic fundamentals. How easy it is to run a private limited company.
Right.
Why are founders going abroad and registering their company sitting out of here, right? So those kind of things we have to solve for.
Okay.
We have to make sure that founders who are sitting in India register their companies here as a first choice. As a first choice,
Sure.
not as a last resort,
Sure.
right? And that's a fundamental difference. Now there is something that is happening. Like a lot of some companies have actually pivoting back to India because the IPO is slightly easier to do in India, right? Like,
Oh,
so-
right.
Yeah,
About
so
the-
that is happening, but that's happening at scale. The initial part, a lot of deep tech founders prefer to register their companies abroad, and that's a problem
Right.
because that's an IP drain.
Sure, absolutely. How could we actually change that though? I mean, ease of doing business
Ease
is
of
on
doing
one piece. Is there anything else beyond that on the
I think the
tax side or anything?
yeah, you could do that. I mean, so that's another whole angle of what taxations
Sure,
you could do.
sure. What would your wish list be if you had to
Yeah.
build it up?
Fundamentally, look at the level of compliances I have to go through as a private limited company. The flexibility of whom I can give ESOPs versus not, right? There are some basic
Interesting. Okay.
structuring issues at the company level. If we can solve that.
Sure.
And on top of that, to your point, if we can come up with some incentives for investors to invest money in startups, which a lot of countries have, That will really help. It will also get abused, and that's the problem with all these things.
Right.
But in larger good, maybe some of those things can be done.
Interesting. Could you expand on that piece a little more? Where in the, is it at the very early stage that you feel like not enough investment appetite
I
is
think
there? Or?
there is enough investment appetite.
Okay.
So founders at the seed stage are not getting stopped with the lack of money.
Sure. Okay.
But we are going and registering our companies outside India.
Right.
So if there is so first is you make it easy to register here,
Right.
but that may not still solve the problem. And therefore, I'm saying that if there are some incentives for investors to, then the whole system, then it will become a first choice rather than second choice.
Right. This made me think of, okay, so slightly self-serving question, but if we think of the whole, now we've covered the government, investors, and several others, but if we actually think of the deep tech innovation as a whole, if we paint a future where we have, where deep tech innovation happens as seamlessly as software innovation happens now, right? With the whole ecosystem, with those many connections between these different players. What do the other bodies in the other stakeholders in the ecosystem actually need to do? What would you say is missing in terms of supporting those early stage founders to actually grow?
Yeah, I think it's there.
Okay.
I think lot of universities are opening up.
Right.
With
Okay.
their infrastructure for entrepreneurs to come and work there. That is very fundamental for a physical deep tech ecosystem to grow.
Sure.
Because when you're doing something in material science, etc., you need physical systems.
Sure.
And a startup cannot afford the labs, to build their
True.
own labs. They anyway have less money. So wherever they have been able to partner with universities to use their infrastructure, it has really helped them. So I would say all universities have to come up with some program where it's easy for startups to collaborate with them for their infrastructure, right? And some universities are doing it.
Sure.
I think that's one. Second is we have already covered the regulatory and the policy making framework, which we can address. The other is, which is probably things are changing, but Indian businesses don't buy from Indian startups yet, and very price sensitive, right? So there is not enough acquisitions happening for technology, etc., by Indian companies. Sure. Whereas that loop, so it's funny now that it is actually somewhere easier to sell to a global customer than to sell to an Indian customer, right? That is the funny part.
Right.
And I'm talking about if you have something of value, right? Something of global value. So those things also needs to change.
Sure.
Yeah.
How do you actually see that changing? Because it's definitely easier to earn a dollar than a rupee.
Yeah, so
how do you see that?
It's
changing?
very funny.
Yeah.
It's like ingrained in our blood, I think.
Right.
We always bend over backwards towards the West.
Right.
So it's funny, if a startup has sold to a customer outside, then that is taken very positively by a customer in India. Sure. And they say, oh, that is using, then maybe I can use it too, right? But those are mindset issues. I think we've been too much under colonialism to change that soon.
Okay, this could be the macro
it's a
thing
micro,
as well, right?
thing. Absolutely.
That's also
100%,
the same.
100%.
Great. One of the things I love that Pi Ventures actually does is publish its areas that it looks forward to. The 15 areas, I think that was a recent publication of what you're seeing go forward. Could you give us a flavor of, now you mentioned material science in 2019, but what else are you looking at now?
Keeps evolving.
Okay.
So I think the report you're referring to was published, I think 3 years back,
Right.
2 to 3 years back.
Yes.
Where we said, okay, these are the shifts that will happen over the next 5 years. So
right.
2026, I think.
And a lot of those played out. That was very interesting.
Some of them played out, some of them didn't play out, and which is the whole nature of the report.
Sure.
I think after that we have published a whole set, just very recently, just a few months back.
Sure.
It's on our blog. It's not in the document form, but if you go to our blog sections, you will find it. Is on the entire material science piece.
Okay.
Material science is again sort of an umbrella technology, but within that, there are lots of stuff happening.
Sure.
And that is also a good read for folks who are interested in seeing what the future may look like.
Sure. Interesting. Why material science specifically, as opposed to space and defense and all these other areas,
Sure.
do you think?
See, defense and space are applications.
Sure.
Material science is technology, which cuts across
Right.
applications.
Okay.
So when you have to look for trends, you have to start with a fundamental technology which will change things.
Okay.
That fundamental technology is material science. And if you think about it, material science innovation is really material.
Right.
So in the sense that some of our eras we have lived in are named by the key material that was found in that era.
Right. Bronze Age, Stone Age, etc. Yeah.
Silicon age, right?
Sure.
So material does change fundamentally how you do things.
That's interesting.
So a lot of core fundamental innovations will come from that.
Sure.
And one of the, again a macro trend here, slightly higher level, is the whole piece of discovering material versus inventing material. A lot of previous science was about discovering materials and putting them together.
Sure.
Now I can sit on a computer and design at an atomic level what kind of material I want.
That's true.
And I can actually realize it. So that gives a very different edge in terms of what I can do at the fundamental level to address different needs.
That's very interesting.
Right? And it can change. It can change the world.
Thank you, Manish. I think we finished my set of questions. Super interesting. I think the takeaway. I love the optimism that you have for actually these pieces coming together and actually growing this ecosystem. I will not. I think my takeaway is how it's moved from people thinking AI was Air India to where it is now and the inflection point we're at.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being part of Upstart. Super interesting. Hopefully we'll have you again soon, and best of luck with Pi Ventures and all the investments going forward.
Thank you so much, Arvind.
Thank you.
All right.